So before you get into a fight, the first thing you need to do is talk it out. And that is what we're going to be doing today. We are going to be talking about TCG combat phases. 3 phases to be exact. We have the pre-fight phase, the mid-fight phase, and the post-fight phase. And I am going to be identifying these phases of combats through trigger effects. The way you structure combat phases and the trigger priorities can make or break the gameplay experience. Clear rules and thoughtful design are the foundation of a great TCG. So let's assume this to be true about your particular card game. Once you enter combat, you declare an attack. Now the effect triggers start to come into play, and it's going to get messy. We begin to get start of combat triggers, when attacking triggers, and destruction triggers. And this is usually when the arguments break out amongst players, because during the phase everything happens so fast that the players will interrupt, miscalculate, and miss effects that are in play. So if you are making your own TCG, you need to understand how the combat phase needs to be ordered so precisely as to not confuse players. The order of which effects trigger and damage calculation must be written clearly and simply in your rulebook, or your players will simply dislike your game. Unlike this video, which I'm hoping you will show some appreciation for the hours I spent making it by gingerly pressing the like and subscribe button. Thank you. Pre-combat phase. So for a lot of TCGs, the first trigger to activate is the passive effect of start of combat phase. Worded in some shape or form like that, these effects can often be things such as power boosts for whether it is your combat phase or your opponent's. Sometimes you will want a card that is stronger only during your opponent's turn as a sort of deterrent. And sometimes you might desire a card that can exceed its strength but only during your turn, which in turn will make it vulnerable to your opponent during their combat phase, unfortunately. Now another start of combat phase effect can be to play additional cards to the field. Sometimes these are permanent, and others can be just until the end of the turn. And sometimes these can be in the form of token cards. That means you gain additional forces without depleting the deck or hand size. So not all TCGs will have start of combat, and they aren't necessarily for your TCG, but they are a form of staggering long effect chains rather than having everything trigger in one instance of declaring an attack. Mid-combat phase. Which brings me to the next trigger, which is usually after a player declares an attack. The when attacking trigger effect will resolve before damage calculation and not afterwards. Usually these types of effects are associated with power boosts, debuffing, and target switching, which are not as useful after damage calculation because half of the targets will have already been destroyed. The opposite trigger for this is when attacked, which will naturally activate before damage calculations, similar to when attacking trigger effects. Now, depending on the style of game, this is usually when additional surprise cards from the hand will be played to counter the opponent. Because without a fun twist during the phase of the game, everything can start to feel a bit predictable. And let's face it, we all know the rush of having that one card in your hand that will turn the tide of battle in those dying moments where your opponent believed that victory was imminent. Now this rush can be mimicked by dice rolls to an extent. Yes, you won't have endless possibilities with dice rolls, which will most likely be for rolling additional damage. And it doesn't provide as much of an unexpected twist if it is the standard rule that you roll the dice for every single attack. But in rolling the dice, you are introducing randomness to your game, the chance to beat the odds and overcome the bigger foe. And those little thrills are what players will appreciate about your game. Post-combat phase. And finally, finally, we have destruction triggers, which are usually when destroyed effects for the losing cards and destroying effects for the winning cards. These bad boys will activate after damage calculation is resolved. These types of triggers are a good way of introducing a catch-up mechanic into your game. If you want to know more about catch-up mechanics, I do have a video. I will put it in the top left, top right corner, one of these corners. Make sure to check it out after this video. Thank you. Right, so where was I? Yes, these types of triggers are a good way of introducing catch-up mechanics into your game for the losing card's owner and slow down the snowballing effect the winning player may have when they are constantly destroying their opponent's cards on the field. Now, destruction triggers aren't usually target-based like when attacking trigger effects are. They usually consist of giving bonus resources, playing cards to the field at a reduced cost or even for free, but a flavorful effect can be to inflict damage to your opponent upon destruction, which usually ties into the card that looks like they sting or blow up. Overall, the ordering of effects is crucial, and it needs to be laid out clearly which player has priority during each turn and each phase in order to have your game run as smoothly as possible. So I'll leave you with this blueprint for you to start with. The start of combat triggers should be worded as the start of your combat phase. That way, they will only be active during that player's turn. This speeds up gameplay just a little bit because when you're playing your turn, you don't want the other player constantly interrupting you with their card effects. And now back onto when attacking triggers and when attacked triggers. You can make them simultaneously activate in the same instance, but that is never a perfect system because one effect can sometimes counter another effect. So when designing a TCG, replacing when attacked triggers for on destruction triggers can be favourable and easier for your players to understand. Or you can decide which player gets priority when triggers activate during one instance. Now, I would favour the attacking player's triggers to activate first because that encourages players to engage in combat and prevent stalling in your game. Stalling is something we like to avoid when designing most games because when you are attacking, you are progressing the game. So if you are in a situation where you feel you can't attack, then that is simply boring and equally frustrating for you as a player. And I would naturally follow the same priority with destruction triggers. If it is your turn and you are the active player, then you should have priority when effects go off. So to sum that up, encourage both players to attack each other. Let me know in the comment section if you feel differently, and remember this advice is to help add structure to your TCG and to give players a better experience and ultimately have fun playing your card game. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe on the way out. I've been James. Thank you very much for watching My Talk TCG.